Hey guys, Mrs. Dan's here. So we're on lesson 6. I'm going to provide you with this sheet so that you don't have to copy down these notes. You could just print it. If you need to copy it though because you don't have a printer, then they'll still be provided for you on your Google Classroom. So we will be organizing data, or we're actually going to learn how to read data that is organized in a two-way frequency table. And there are some calculations that we can make, something called relative frequency, and there are a few types of relative frequency. So there's the general relative frequency, which is the ratio of the frequency to the total. So we usually write as a fraction and then change it to a decimal. There's something called joint relative frequency, and those are the inside ratios, and I color coded it down here. I made it purple. And then there's something called marginal relative frequency, which are the ratios that are in the margins, and those are color coded green. And there's something that we're going to be talking about called conditional relative frequency. So really what this lesson comes out, the tricky part about this lesson is that it's more reading comprehension. Some people get tricked. They don't know, like, am I doing relative frequency? Am I doing the joint relative frequency? Is it marginal? Is it conditional? So you have to be really, really, really careful with the words. I will go over the do now with you and do the development with you, and then your homework is to do the problem set. So this lesson was, of course, first intended for us to do it in the classroom, and you would come up and mark off what color your hair is and what color your eyes are, so that we were using real statistics. I just so happened to have information saved from one of my classes from last year. So in one of my classes last year, there were 3 people who had brown hair and blue eyes. I'm doing this first as tallies. Then there were 11 people who had brown eyes and brown hair. So it's important for you to know the difference between a tally and a frequency. Tally are these marks, and when you get to the 5th one, you cross through it, where a frequency is the actual number that you write down. In one of my classes last year, there were 2 people who had green eyes and brown hair. There were 2 people with blonde hair, blue eyes. 1 person with blonde hair and brown eyes. 1 person with blonde hair and green eyes. And there wasn't anyone who had red hair. So that just gets left blank. But now when we complete the two-way frequency table, we're changing the tally marks into numbers, because that's what a frequency is. And then in the margins is where we put our totals. So when we do the total horizontally across, I'm really finding the total people who had blue eyes, then the total number of people who had brown eyes, and the total number of people who had green eyes. When I do my totals going vertically, now this is the total number of people who had brown hair, and the total number of people who had blonde hair, and the total number of people who had red hair. Since this really takes into account all the people in the classroom, when I do the total of the totals horizontally and the total of the totals vertically, those numbers turn out to be the same, and that's kind of like a check to make sure you counted everything properly. So when I go across horizontally, it adds up to 20, and when I go down vertically, it also adds up to 20. So there were 20 people in this class last year. And then we can answer these questions. How many students had blonde hair and blue eyes? Remember, I said this is a reading comprehension lesson, and when you have questions on your test, you have to be so careful. Blonde hair and blue eyes. So we go look at the blonde hair and the blue eyes, and where they intersect is the answer. So that must mean that there are two people. I'm just going to get rid of those lines that I just drew so it doesn't look like I crossed it out. But that's how you read it. Next, it asks how many students had red hair. So I could look at just the total number of students who had red hair, and that's 0. Just read carefully and you should be able to answer this. Now it's asking us to construct a table that shows joint relative frequencies and marginal relative frequencies. So the joint relative frequencies, remember, are these things in the center, while the marginal relative frequencies are these things on the edges. And all together, that's just relative frequency. The whole entire chart, when I fill it in, I found the relative frequency of the data. So you're going to want to have your calculator for this part. Notice it says that we're going to round all answers to the nearest hundredth. I like to first write it as a fraction and then change it to a decimal. So the number of people who had blue eyes and brown hair were 3 people, but there were a total of 20 people surveyed, so this is a 3 out of 20. And then you change the fraction 3/20ths into a decimal to the nearest hundredth is 0.15. And you do that for all of these. So I just completed all of the joint relative frequencies. I still have to do the marginal relative frequencies. It's done the exact same way. I can see this total of 16 people that had brown hair, and that 16 people is out of 20. And then when you do 16 divided by 20, you get 0.8. It does say round to the nearest hundredth, so write it as 0.80. Always go out to the hundredths. I guess I should go back to these zeros and put 0.00. Whenever it says round to a particular place, your decimal should go out to that place. So there were 4 people out of 20 who had blonde hair. So that's 0.2 or 0.20. And then there were 0 people out of 20. So that's 0.00. And then when I do this marginal frequency, now I'm going horizontally, but really I'm just looking at this number up here. It's 5 out of 20, which is 0.25. And then 12 out of 20 is 0.60. 3 out of 20 is 0.15. And 20 out of 20, this will always turn out to be 1 or 1.00 because it represents 100% of the people. So along the margins, these are your marginal relative frequencies. Inside, the first ones I did are your joint relative frequencies. So we need to transfer the same information over. It was 3, 11, 2, with a total of 16, 2, 1, 1, which totaled 4. There was no red hair. And then this is a 5, 12, 3, and the totals both way were 20. So it says that we'd like to understand associations or trends within the data. That is, like, would a response to one category tell us something about the response to another? That would be the only reason for taking surveys, to kind of draw conclusions. So we have to see if there's a connection between eye color and hair color by using the conditional relative frequencies. When they talk about conditional relative frequency, there's a condition put in place. So what is the conditional relative frequency? To be honest with you, they don't even have to use these words. When it says, what is the conditional relative frequency, they don't have to tell you it's a condition, because right here it tells you of having blue eyes if you have blonde hair. This if you have blonde hair is a condition. Like, I only want to look at the people who have blonde hair. That's the condition. You must have blonde hair. Of the people who have blonde hair, how many have blue eyes? So what is the conditional relative frequency of having blue eyes if you have blonde hair? And it tells us in parentheses here that this is equivalent to asking what the percent of people with blonde hair have blue eyes. So since you have to have blonde hair, we're only looking at the blonde-haired people, which means this, if you have blonde hair, tells us what number to use as our denominator. It's the people with blonde hair. So there were 4 people with blonde hair. Just out of those people with blonde hair, how many had blue eyes? Oh, it was 2 of them. So that turns out to be 0.5. And if I want to change it to a percent, that's 50%. So in this one class, if you had blonde hair, seems like 50% of those people also had blue eyes. So what is the conditional relative frequency of having blonde hair if you have blue eyes? And some people can't see the difference between these two questions. Now here's your condition. You have to have blue eyes. Blue eyes is your denominator. So if you have blue eyes, right here, there's 5 people. Out of those people with blue eyes, 2 of them have blonde hair. When you change 2/5 to decimal, you get 0.4, which is 40% of the people. If you have blue eyes, it seems like 40% of those people will also have blonde hair. So does it appear that having blue eyes has a dependency, or at least has an association with having blonde hair? And to be honest with you, I wish I would have done this survey with you guys. I have, what, like 28 of you in class. Really, the larger your sample, the more confident you can be in your results. So right here with these results, I guess it seems like there's a possibility, since the percentages are rather high. I don't know, rather high. Like, what do we consider high? I guess halfway or more is pretty good, right? If more than half of the people, so I don't know, are somewhat high, or they're on the high end. They're on the higher end instead of the lower end. And really, I think that there is a relationship between blonde hair and blue eyes. A lot. Well, what I can say is I think that, what do I think? I don't know. I can't give you my opinion. I just see lots of, if you have blue eyes, you tend to have blonde hair instead of brown hair. That's what I'm trying to say. Are there people with brown hair and blue eyes? Yeah. And their eyes really pop out, even since their complexion tends to be a little darker with the dark hair. But there tends to be some kind of relationship. These statistics, like I said, I wish I would have done it with you guys to see what the results would have been. Anyway, is it more likely that a person with brown hair has blue eyes, or that a person with blonde hair has brown eyes? And oh, what a strange question that is. We'd have to make 2 fractions and compare the 2. So is it more likely that a person with brown hair, so that's your denominator, you have to have brown hair. I'm always going to underline what the denominator is. Maybe that's like how I'll always do it. You have to have brown hair. Brown hair. there's 16 people with brown hair. So they're asking, is it more likely that the person with brown hair has blue eyes? So out of these brown-haired people, who has blue eyes, brown hair, blue eyes, there's 3 of them, which is about 0.19 if you do it on a calculator, right? 3 divided by 16 to the nearest hundredth is 0.19. So I'd say that's about 19% of the people. If you have brown hair, about 19% of the people will have blue eyes. But they want us to compare it with a person with blonde hair. Remember I said I'm going to underline what my denominator is. So a person with blonde hair, now I'm looking here, 4 of them, has brown eyes, 1 of them, 1/4, you know, is 0.25, which is 25%. So which is more likely? In this case, it's more likely that a person with blonde hair has brown eyes than a person with brown hair has blue eyes. And with another class, more people, maybe those results would be different, but I can only base it on what I see here. I wrote the 2 fractions, compared the 2%. This is larger, therefore it's more likely that a person with blonde hair has brown eyes, right? Person with blonde hair has brown eyes. Rather than, I'm not going to write this whole thing, but rather than a person with brown hair having blue eyes. A lot of these kinds of questions tend to be like multiple choice questions. There could be maybe a question where they ask you to do the relative frequencies, and maybe there'll be one question that goes along with it. But if they want to ask you questions like this, I think we tend to see it more in the multiple choice, which means it can be really tricky, so you have to be so careful. How about exercise 4, where this data was already gathered, it's not from an old class, maybe it's true, maybe it's some college that they really did conduct the survey, but there's a survey of 52, so I like that there's more people, graduating seniors, and it was conducted to determine if there was a connection between the gender of the student and whether they were going on to college. Based on this data, what is more likely? Okay, more likely that someone going to college is female. So remember I said I'd always underline the denominator. So what has to happen here? Do you have to go to college or do you have to be female? The way that this is worded, is it more likely that someone going to college, so this is your denominator, that's the condition, you have to go to college. Someone going to college is female. So going to college, there's 29 of them. You have to be female, there's 13 of them. So this brought me to that fraction. Or that someone who is female is going to college. So now you have to be female, and we're checking to see if you're going to college. So if I look at the females, that's looking this way, there are 22 females. Out of those females going to college, it's still that 13. So this sentence made that fraction. Just by the look of this, 13 over 29 versus 13 over 22, I know which one's bigger. If for some reason it tricks you, just use that calculator. And I want to do 13 divided by 29 to get about 0.45, which is about 45%. Let's write words with this. About 45% of people going to college are female. This of thing, of people going to college, that's always your denominator. You probably learned like in 6th grade too, like a saying when you would try to make ratios, is over of equals percent over 100. The of number is always in the bottom. So about 45% of people going to college, right, there were 29 people going to college, are female. And if I were to change this 13 over 22, it's about 0.59, which is 59%. If I wrote that in a sentence, I would say about 59% of females go to college. It's 2 different sentences. Again, it's like so important to get this reading comprehension. So this one says about 45% of the people going to college are female, while this says about 59% of females go to college. 2 different sentences. It's like if I were to go to a college and count how many people were female, there'd be about 45% of them. But if I were to gather a whole bunch of females and just ask who of you guys go to college, about 59% of them would. So what's more likely? It's more likely that someone who is female is going to college. That's the answer to the question. And that's everything. So remember, it comes down to reading comprehension. You have to read so carefully. Let's see if I can maybe give you some tips on some of this stuff. Which of the following is joint relative frequency? You know, the joint relative frequency are the things in here. And right now, these are frequencies because these are just numbers. A relative frequency is a fraction that you change to a decimal. So frequencies are numbers, whole numbers, I guess I should say, where relative frequencies are fractions or ratios out of the total. It is out of the total, so out of the 56. What is the which of the following is closest to the joint relative frequency of being a male who likes social studies? So it's going to be out of the 56. Which of the following is the marginal relative frequency of liking math? So again, this is out of the total, but liking math will be in the margin. A person looking at this table concludes as more likely, right here, this is our condition now, it's more likely that a female will like social studies. So being female is your condition, so I'm going to underline it because it's your denominator. And then the other fraction is a male will like math. So the condition is being a male student. So that would be your denominator. Number 5, is it more likely that a person who likes social studies will be female? So what's the condition? You have to like social studies. That's your denominator. Or that a person who is female, you now have to be female. That's your condition. That's your denominator. Will like social studies. And I'm not going to give you any more tips. You're on your own for this. I really need you guys to send me questions if you have them. I feel like I'm not talking to you as much as I used to. Send the questions. I'll answer you. I really try and answer right away. Maybe if you're doing it at 11 o'clock at night, you'll have to wait till the next morning. But good luck. Ask me questions. We're going to be having a test on the end of this unit, so you want to be able to do well. Hope to hear from you soon. See ya. Bye.